Welcome to the Enchanted Earth Podcast, where you will hear stories of nature with the power to transform our lives. These sacred stories are begging to be shared now. So listen in as my guest today shares one of their own. Welcome, everybody. Today I have with me Sumita Singha, and let me tell you a little bit about Sumita. She is an award-winning architect, teacher, and writer. She has served on many committees of the Royal Institute of British Architects, called RIBA, and on the NHS board. Sumita is currently the RIBA board trustee for education. She founded Architects for Change, the equality forum at RIBA. She's trustee of 3 built environment charities and the founding director of Charashila, an environmental design charity. She has taught architecture for over 25 years and is the author of many publications on architecture. Sumita received an OBE for services to architecture in 2021. So welcome, Sumita.
Thank you.
So for those of us who don't know what OBE is, can you share just a bit about that?
OBE stands for the Order of British Empire, and it's the second highest civilian award given in the UK by Her Majesty or His Majesty at the moment. Mine was given by the late Queen. So I got mine in the New Year honors of 2021. And it was quite something because I got it during COVID. And usually you get letters in the post. And I got an email which went straight into junk mail. So I looked at it a few days later and it had an attachment and it said that we like to offer you the OBE. Now, during COVID, there were so many scams. I looked at that and I thought, there's no way this is true, to be given the second highest civilian honor by Her Majesty. And I didn't kind of do anything about it. Then I showed it to my son and he said, Mom, just ring that number which is there. So I said, fine, I shall do that. I rang them and they were like slightly annoyed because they were saying, we worked so hard through COVID to get all these admissions done because they have to verify each nominee for this award. So I said, no, I'd like to receive it, please. We had 3 options. Usually you get it from Her Majesty herself, but because it was COVID, so yes, I had it couriered over by a young man and went to the garden party wearing my OBE. It was for the OBEs only. I think it was done just that year. But of course, Her Majesty was too ill to attend by that time. So it was Prince Charles who came with his wife, Camilla. And I can't remember, there must have been, it was Princess Anne as well. She was there. It was fun. And then, of course, Her Majesty died. And but I had met Her Majesty in Delhi because she inaugurated something I had designed. So she inaugurated a mural I had designed. And I had a little chat with her. And nobody gets to have a chat with Her Majesty, on such a sort of, in such close proximity that I did.
Wow.
And I thought, well, I had that experience. And, she's great. She's a great lady. And I just loved her. So I just thought, well, it's okay. I didn't get to see her. I've already met her, talked to her. I think I'm all right.
Wow, that is so cool. That is so cool. And so thank you so much for being on this podcast, talking about the importance of nature in our lives. And one thing that I find I love to ask my guests is what their childhood was like in connection to nature. Can you share a little bit about growing up in India and the two different environments I think you grew up in.
Yeah, sure. Um, I had sort of this kind of um, binary or whatever, very contrasting environments I grew up in. So one was the city, which was Delhi. And Delhi at that time was still very much like a garden city. It was planned as a garden city. And it was very beautiful. It's got like lovely wide roads with trees, and the center of Delhi is really even now it's still quite amazing. That's how it was planned, as a garden city, and we loved it. But I grew up in a very poor household. My parents were not very rich at all. We lived in one room above, as tenants above my uncle's home, which is underneath. And it was very, very tough life. My mother sewed all our clothes from scraps of materials she got from the tailor shops. She got food which were being sold on pavement sellers. Really reduced price stuff, Russian shops. Um, while so we learned about scarcity from growing up like that. I had to even sleep on a table, that the dining table, because wasn't enough space. So growing up in such poverty with not much food, not many clothes, I think I learned about um, coping with scarcity. But in our summer holidays for 2 months, we would go to my father's village, and it took us like 36 hours to get there. So the first bit by train, and then I think it was 3 or 4 hours by bus, and finally, when the road stopped, you had to go on a bullock cart and go the rest of the way to the village. So we were absolutely shattered when we arrived there. I remember the first thing we were offered there was this glass of homemade lemonade, which was like so delicious in that heat. And because there's no electricity, so there were no fans, you had to pump water out of a well. But we had a good thing that my father, in his foresight, had put up composting toilets. So at least, we had that. And but there was no electricity, so you kind of went to sleep when it got dark. You woke up when it was light, and you had all these amazing sounds and sights, like those fireflies coming into your room, and you could have one in your palm. It was glowing, this sort of greenish white light. It was amazing. It was like the stars had landed up on the earth. There was the river. There was a beautiful, very long, sandy walk to get to the river, and beautiful sand. Unfortunately, all that sand has been robbed. The villagers have been robbed of that sand. That's been taken away to make concrete somewhere, because river sand is very fine and it's beautiful. It was this beautiful golden color, and it's all gone now, all gone. So 30 years later, I took my children there, hoping to show them this beautiful sand, and none of it was there. It had been sort of, sand is the most trafficked mineral in the world. Yeah, we're running out of sand. So they're going all over poor countries and taking sand from there because there's no one to object. I mean, the villagers haven't got a clue as to why the sand was taken. So I was trying to explain to them this is being taken to make concrete. But they said, well, so what? I said, well, do you not realize that once the sand has been stripped off, it's literally like if it's stripped off like that, so it's the raw earth. And when, during the monsoons, when there is flooding, the sand would absorb the extra water. And now the water just comes in further than it used to. Lots of animals and birds have been hurt because the areas where they would rest or nest have been removed with the sand. And also not just birds and animals, the sand was used to actually, the heated sand was used to make puffed rice. Beautiful process. So you heat up the sand, you put the rice on it, and you stir it, and this sort of puffed rice is sort of popping out. And I used to watch my grandmother do that. And you can't do that. That sand is gone. The sand was also used by potters. It was used for religious ceremony, a whole host of things. So when I told them about it, was then they realized they'd been robbed, and they don't know who came and took all the sand along the whole course of the river. But when we were children, we played on that sand. I used to have picnics on that sand. We just ran around. We gained weight. It was just beautiful living, in with the farm. I used to go and milk the cows. I helped my uncle sort of deliver a car, which was quite an experience. I wasn't very strong, but I would help in any farming activities that I could. And it was just so lovely. We'd just scamper around with no shoes, barefoot, and our skin would be glowing. It was not polluted. And all that has suddenly gone. And I feel kind of robbed, not just of my childhood memories, but of the future for the children that are now there. They will never know how beautiful the riverside was, or, the fact that they have electricity now. They'll never realize how beautiful it is to have the fireflies landing inside, in the darkness. And all sorts of things the children of today will not know, will never know, which is sad.
Yeah. Wow. There's a term, I think, solastalgia, when you grieve the things that gave you solace, that gave you peace and calm, that are no longer there.
Mm, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a really pretty, I think, horrifying thought that somebody in a recent podcast mentioned. It's the idea that generation after generation we're losing our habitats, our environments, and beautiful things within it. But it's been occurring so that each generation doesn't really know what the previous generation lost,
Mm,
right? We only see what we lost during our lifetime. So
yes.
say there's a certain amount of birdsong in our environment, and maybe we remember that as a child. But we don't know what our grandparents had or what our parents had. And it, I am sure, has been diminished over time.
Yes. Absolutely. And, I was recently in Masai Mara, and I was living in a tent in this space, and we had wild animals outside, wild animals inside the tent. It was quite crazy.
Well, like, what
Uh,
was in the tent?
and they're like little cat-like animals. They're only found in sub-Saharan Central Africa, and they're called. I'm forgetting the exact name, but anyway, they're like small mammals, and they're quite shy. And somehow they came into my tent. I mean, as long as it wasn't a snake, I wasn't scared. I went back to sleep. I did call the night watchman, but this whole camp was sort of it was run on water harvesting. So the water, we didn't have, you couldn't open a tap and get hot water. It was very cold. It was 8, 9 degrees in Masai Mara. So in the morning it was very cold, and we had to leave quite early in the mornings in order to see the animals. But you had to get someone in to fill hot water in the tank outside your shower and your basin. And then they would mix some cold water to get a nice sort of lukewarm um, water. And you'd have a shower, and you'd brush your teeth with the warm water. So it was all very kind of, wasn't very advanced. And if you had to, the whole entire village or camp was run on solar power. So at night, you didn't turn on the lights because it would disturb the animals. But you could, if you had some problem, you could call the night watchman by flashing your solar light, which is when I had these animals in my room. I called someone to have a look, see if they could find it. But, you know, it had run away, and there was a cat. It's called a serval cat that was on the top of my tent, and used to front around. You could like hear it outside. And the first night I was there, I had lions outside, roaring away. And when I read, I don't know if you know, but Karen Blixen was a Danish woman who went to live in Kenya, and her film was made. A film was made about her life out of Africa, and that was based on Kenya, Masai Mara, and so it was interesting to read her account before I left, because she mentioned so many animals, so many lions. She could just walk out and see an animal, any, a lion or a zebra. I mean, I saw lots of zebras, I saw lots of deers, and I saw lots of lions, but rhinos were very difficult to find, for example, lots of hippos. So there were certain animals that we couldn't see. But in her book, she mentions so many animals just wandering about freely. And then she also talks about hunting them, killing them. So, the thing is that it's only through her books and her account and the photographs she has of dead animals till we realize how much we've lost. Otherwise, we wouldn't know. But then I recorded some of these bird sounds, which is just amazing. And I brought them back with me to play them, because as you say, we lose so much and we never realize how much we have lost.
Yeah, I so identify with the sound of birdsong at night. When I visited Costa Rica, probably about 12 years ago or so, uh, we experienced the rainforest, the interior rainforest, and then the coastal rainforest, and even some islands in Panama, in the Caribbean, in Panama, and the bird song, the monkeys, the howler monkeys, and just all of the life that you heard in the night was so amazing. Like you said, it was comforting. It was just magical. And then when I returned home, and this was in like January, so I returned home, and of course, all the windows are closed, and there's not a lot of birds out in the middle of January. I was so sad that I wasn't hearing that bird song and
Mm.
those sounds at night. I cried that first night that we were home. There was just such a strong connection. I understand you want to go back as well to that place. Like me, we want to experience that again.
Yes. And it's very sad that the generations who come after us will never know that, just to hear, you know, again in the Masai Mara, same, the night you heard these birds which you never heard during the day, I think they only came out at night. And also I was in the Amazon, and you'd have the howler monkeys, in the evening, and different birds. We also had animals inside our this place we stayed in. Wasn't exactly a tent, but it was bit more stronger or solid than a tent, but animals somehow made their way inside it. And you kind of live with those, and the same in the village. We lived with all sorts of animals, including snakes. You can, if you want, if you know their habits. You can live with so many different animals, but we tend to say, well, this is my space and we're going to kill anything that comes near it. And there's so much conflict between man and animal, at that point where we meet, where the jungle sort of meets the city, if you like. And there's a fabulous picture, which has got an award recently at the Wildlife Awards in the UK, which shows a tiger resting very close to a village. And, this conflict between human and animals has become so strong. And then some people say COVID happened because it was part of this conflict. It came from animals, and there could be another pandemic because animals are coming closer to humans, and there's contact between them. And whether that COVID came from animals being eaten and the virus transferring to humans, or whether it came just from breathing or being near them, it jumped from one animal to the other, and so on and so forth. We will never know. But the thing is that we need to give space to animals. I think COVID was that sort of lesson. And if we haven't learned that to conserve our wild spaces and respect nature, I don't think we've learned anything.
Yeah. There's so much there that you just said. There was a story that you and I, when we talked one time, you were sharing, talking about birds and about being in urban environments. That is, birds are around us in urban environments, maybe not as much, definitely not as much as when we go out into wild nature. But can you share a little bit about an unusual encounter you had with a bird?
Sure, yeah. So when I lived in India, we had so many sparrows, and every time, around, I think it was like late morning and early afternoons, they'd come, and my mother would give them seeds or some kind of leftovers. And they would be like hopping and chirping. It was just so beautiful, just so, um, just cheered you up just to hear them. And they were busy little things, little tiny little blobs of brown, going everywhere, chirping, doing their own things. And I just love sparrows. And so when I came to live in the UK and in this particular place where I am now, near my house is another house, which I call the Sparrow House. It's just full of sparrows. It's amazing, that so many birds, especially sparrows, gather there. I guess they find it's kind of overgrown. You can't really see the house. It's got so many trees and also it's like a jungle almost, the front lawn of that place. And I think the person who lives there is slightly eccentric, or, I've seen him about. He puts food out for foxes. We have lots of foxes and they're everywhere. I've had foxes. I live on the second floor, but we've had foxes jumping onto the second floor. They can jump really high. So I've had foxes on my balcony, and foxes on my terrace. The neighbors who live above me have had foxes on the fourth floor as well.
Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, they do jump. They jump. So we have all these animals around us, and but I love sparrows. So I'd never seen a sparrow really come to the balcony where I was. And during COVID, I was very, very ill. I had heart failure, and I needed to have a heart transplant, or so I was told. And I sort of accepted it. I thought maybe that's it. I have a heart transplant and end of problem. And my heart was at functioning at 11%. So it was really, really. I still have like I'm breathless sometimes. But during COVID, I didn't get seen by a doctor for a long time because each time I went there and said I was feeling breathless, they said, "Oh, it must be COVID. Go and get tested." So I got tested 3 times. It was all negative. And I said, "Look, there's something wrong. I'm exhausted, just walking few steps, and I haven't got COVID. So there's something wrong." And it was on that day I went there and I said, "Look, you have to really test me, see what's wrong." And they took my heartbeat, which was very high. And they said, you must go to the accident emergency. And that's how I was diagnosed with heart failure. So when I was told you need to have a heart transplant, and I was put on a list, and in the hospital, I thought this is it. And then that was winter. Though I was told that 2 days before Christmas, 2020, and in the spring of 2021, it was still, um, COVID lockdown. I still hadn't received news of my OBE that I mentioned. But I was just watering plants on the balcony, and I saw this little movement. I saw this little golden bird just alight and chirping at me, and I looked at it and I thought, wow, what kind of bird is that? I've never seen that ever in my life. And in those days, social media was a big thing because that's how people were communicating. By the time I'd gone to get my camera, my phone, take a photo of it, had gone, but it had chirped, like it had really absolutely looked at me and chirped as if it was saying something to me. And by the time I came back with my camera, it had gone. So I I tweeted. I said, "Does anyone know a bird which looks like a sparrow, but is golden in color?" And I had a response, and they put a picture of this bird. So, did it look like this? I said, "Yes, it did." And it turns out it's a form of albino, or albino, as we say in the UK, sparrow. So it wasn't white, but it was a golden color. you know so there is a word, there's a word for it. I can't remember, but it was one of those sparrows which didn't have the full pigmentation that you'd find, and they're very rare. They're like one in a million, you find those. So I was like amazed that I'd seen this bird, one in a million, but what was it saying to me? And so it wasn't quite spring. It was like, I think maybe February or maybe late March. And I'd gone for a test before they had the transplant. They want to make sure your lungs are functioning, your heart is sort of where it was exactly. So they check you out. And a few weeks later, after I saw this bird, I got the news that my lungs are fine. I didn't need the heart transplant. And I felt the bird was just trying to give me some hope, was trying to tell me something. And the fact that it's one in a million chance that you see a bird like this, especially in an urban environment. I'd never, ever seen one in my entire life. I thought, this must mean something. And, you have these chance things, you see things. It's only later they make sense to you. But after that, I felt, you must be walking around and experiencing so many things from nature that you never think twice. Do you know?
Oh,
I,
yeah.
so I don't know where I'm going with this, in the sense that, I'm still, my heart isn't 100% better. There are still uh, things I need to do to improve it. But the fact that they said, well, for the moment, you don't need a transplant was just good news for me. But I think we do walk around and miss all these little angels, I feel, who come and give us messages, tell us not to worry, because we're so engrossed in our, got headphones on, we don't listen to anything. We got, we're looking at our phones, we're not looking at what's happening around us. So I think we miss a lot by not being engaged with our surroundings, by not being mindful, if I can put it that way.
Right. Right. And I think at times nature needs to do something pretty spectacular to get us to notice. So that bird was not just a regular brown sparrow, although that would have been magnificent to have one
Yes.
speak to you. It had to be this rare, very rare bird that got you to really notice this is important. This is magical.
Yes. That
This
life
is
is magical.
communication. Yes, life is so magical if we just open our eyes to it, right? Slow down. I know I'm guilty even, sometimes taking the dog for a walk or taking a walk and listening to a podcast. Although I don't have my headphones on, I just have it in front of me. But yeah, you're in distraction. You're not, fully engaged. I really hope that this podcast and the book where people share these sometimes just small experiences that have such resonance, such deep, heartfelt realizations, revelations that can come from them if we just spend a little time with them. I'm hoping that can inspire people to, one, be more mindful when they're in nature more often, and two, maybe remember unusual circumstances, unusual occurrences that have happened to them, like your albino bird, your beautiful little sparrow, and say, the little curiosity was very unusual. Was there some deeper significance to it?
It's Carl Jung who talks about serendipity and, the fact that, you know, we are connected and, it's little things to us, if we only see meaning in them, it can actually help us to live a more happy life. But we don't. We get so engrossed in our day to day problems. We don't actually look at our surroundings. And Buddhism as well talks about there's a thing called eshefuni, which means two but not two. Yeah. So it's about you being part of the environment. So you're kind of separate from the environment. You're two, but you're not two because you're part of the whole. So without you experiencing the environment, it in a way it doesn't exist, right? And the environment affects you. So it's part of this one whole thing, but there are two elements to it. And it talks about trying to connect with your environment, and your environment could be not just animals, but it could be people. I've seen so many people, with young kids who are really curious to explore, look at an earthworm or a bird or something like that, and the parents are looking at their phone and not paying any attention to what the kid wants to do. Children are born naturally curious and they love nature. And if we can actually inspire them and help them to look at nature and be curious about the little things, I think they will become much more healthy individuals, healthy in both body and mind.
Yeah, it's that nurture aspect. I mean, that has been something that I've been thinking about for uh, many years, but really concentrated in this last couple of years in writing this book is, are we all nature people? Are we born all nature people? And then what happens?
Mm,
Our influence of our parents, of course, is huge when we're
mm,
really young. I volunteer at a local nature center that does nature education and wildlife rehabilitation. And I was walking through the house. It's in this beautiful old house built in 1920. I was walking through, and there's different rooms with different exhibits. And this one young child, probably 4 years old, was saying, "Mommy, Mommy, I want to see the snakes." And she went, "Oh, snakes. I hate snakes. No, I'm not going in there." And she like just kind of pulled them. And oh my gosh, I felt there it is. There's, hopefully that child will get to experience something that they're passionate about in nature with
mm,
another adult. I mean, or hopefully that adult will nurture them in other ways, maybe trees. I can't judge, but that is what happens to so many of us.
Yes,
We get the fear and the judgment from, um, from our parents or from our caregivers.
absolutely. Yeah. I think had I not had the experience of my parents and my uncle sort of loving nature, even though they lived in the city, and my mum grew little vegetables, she in pots, and she amazing, she grew tomatoes and pineapples and all sorts of things,
Mhm.
from just like, she wasn't a gardener, she just like literally do some kind of experiment. He would have a plant with um you know all sorts of vegetables, and it was great because we weren't that rich, so we had little plants giving us food there. But also going in the village and having that life, I feel that we're so fortunate. And it's amazing, that when I went to Masai Mara, I thought, my goodness, I'm paying this much to live exactly how I lived in my village, you
Right.
know?
And that gets to a real problem here. You know, I saw Richard Louv speak, who wrote The Last Child in the Woods and he coined the term nature deficit disorder. And it is what we're talking about with children and the younger generations. And in there, he said, it's not just the developed world that is feeling nature deficit disorder. It's worldwide.
Mm, mm,
Even in undeveloped countries where we would say as Westerners are, more primitive and are like living off the land. Well, they're really not,
yeah, yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah.
It's really slipping away fast.
Mm, mm. One of the saddest things I saw in Masai Mara was, people trying to take selfies of them with the animals. And so there was a point in which a cheetah was surrounded by these jeeps, and the cheetah was in the center. I was sort of looking, trying to see where it could go. And of course, our jeep was also there. But people were like literally kind of coming in front of. So I had a very polite driver, and we stood back, for me to see. But there were people pushing ahead of us, trying to get this, close to the animal. And this poor animal didn't know where to go. And this happened in the morning. And when we were driving back to the camp, we saw the same cheetah again with these, you know, jeeps around it, people trying to make movies or trying to take selfies with the cheetah in the background and all sorts of things, and really being aggressive. So the animal is instead of being something, you admire, you look at, has become a spectacle, you know. So it's and you had young children watching their parents doing this. So they have no respect for the animal either. And when I was reading Karen Blixen's account of so many animals being there and, loss of wildlife there in Kenya and other places, I just think, that's because we have lost respect for the animals that live there. So, it's happening. This conflict between man and animal is happening everywhere. You know, this is, mentioned COVID, for example, previously. I mentioned the fact there are sort of wolves and tigers coming into Indian villages and then trying to attack people because they've got nothing left. They don't have anything left to eat in their little part of the forest. So I think we have to really, kind of think about nature being nature deficient. What does it mean? It also means lack of respect for nature.
Absolutely. But as you were talking, it made me come back to this idea that the reason we're in the situation we're in is because of a lack of respect for our inner inner world. We're not loving ourselves. There's so much disconnection from our inner world and who we are, and degradation of our spiritual soul.
Mm.
That is just, the outer world is a visual reflection of that.
Yes. Yes.
So there's so much work to do, but I like to be very optimistic. There's a lot of us that are recognizing this more than ever before.
Mm.
And it
Mm.
only takes a small percentage of humanity, I think, to make tremendous change for the positive, for the
Yes.
good,
Yes.
for the good. We just have to come back to reverence, respect, love, kindness, compassion for not only the natural world, because we have to do that for ourselves too. And we're all one, like you said. It's all the same.
Yes. Yes. We can't survive without animals, part of this whole ecological balance. And if, you know, we think, well, we don't eat tigers, we eat wheat or whatever it is. But it's all part of that chain. No small bee, for example, the honey bee does enormous amount of work. They tried to replicate the work of the bee using machines, and they can't do it because the bee is so clever and it pollinates plants very quickly, very efficiently, much better than any machine or robots could do. So I think we need that understanding, that respect of nature within ourselves, and realize that we are alive because of them, because of this tiny bee, we're alive, and that's something we need to kind of, any animal, really, they're all part of this cycle. They're part of this chain. They're part of this world. And we really, must do our best to, respect nature.
Yeah. We're all part of the web or the weave,
Yes.
and you can't
Yes.
just pull one thread without affecting them all, right?
Yes, exactly. Beautiful.
Mhm.
Yes.
Oh, well, I am just so happy we were able to get on today and have this conversation. And I just want to say you're you're such a light. There's just such luminous light coming from you. And
Oh,
I and I know we haven't talked about it, but in the book you did talk about your uncle, and his face, his smile reminded you of the full moon. And
yes.
actually, it's a full moon today, and
Yes.
you have that light.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. That's very kind. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Sumita. And I really look forward to connecting again with you in the future. It's such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Maureen. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for being a part of the Enchanted Earth podcast. Comment below, share, and most of all, please hit the subscribe button so that you'll hear when we publish another inspiring episode. You can visit us at luminous-spaces.com for more information on our online courses, retreats, and offerings. Thank you and have a magical day.